My daughter blocked me after I refused to co-sign on her second house. Told me I was a useless father who never did enough. So I disappeared. A few months later, her name came up in a legal battle. She was being sued, and the one man who could testify to help her case was me. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, tell me where you're watching or listening from. It's always great to hear from you. Feel free to support us by subscribing to this channel, liking and sharing this story. Now here's how everything started. She showed up on a Tuesday, which already felt like a bad omen. Tuesdays were the quiet days, the in-between kind that weren't cursed like Mondays but didn't carry any promise like Fridays either. I was sitting at the kitchen table, same spot I always did, sipping lukewarm coffee and going through the circulars like it was still 1997. That was my morning routine. Peaceful, predictable. Then the knock came, 3 short raps, sharp, impatient. I opened the door, and there she stood, my daughter, Marissa, all manicured fingers, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of forced smile that meant she wasn't here to check on me. She was here to ask for something. We hadn't fought recently, but we hadn't been close either. She called on birthdays, sometimes. Sent a card with a typed message, no handwriting. Ever since she got that corporate job in Atlanta, she'd shifted into a new gear, more polished, more distant. It was like I'd been downgraded from dad to the guy who used to pay for things. Still, I let her in. She walked around like the place was foreign, wrinkling her nose at the wood paneling and the faded recliner I refused to replace. I could already feel the ask building in her throat. And sure enough, she didn't waste much time. "Dad," she said, her voice light, too rehearsed. "I need you to co-sign something for me. Just a small thing." That phrase, "just a small thing," should have set off alarms right away. Marissa never asked for small things. Not since she was 15 and demanded a sweet 16 that rivaled a wedding. I asked her what kind of something. She pulled a folder out of her designer tote and slid it across the table like we were doing a business deal. "It's a mortgage," she said casually. "I'm buying a second house. Investment property. Airbnb or something. I just need a stronger financial profile, and yours would really help." I stared at the numbers, at the rows of fine print I didn't pretend to understand. My chest tightened. "Second house?" I asked, and she rolled her eyes like I'd just asked her what a mortgage was. "Don't be dramatic, Dad," she said, already defensive. "It's not like I'm asking you to pay for it. I just need your signature. It'll boost my loan approval. That's all. You won't even be involved." She leaned back in the chair, crossed her legs like she was at brunch, and added, "You always said you wanted to help me get ahead, right?" And that was the part that stung the most, because I had said that. I didn't want to help her, but I also wasn't stupid. I knew what co-signing meant. It meant I'd be liable. It meant if she flopped, I'd be the one dealing with the fallout. And at my age, with no steady income and a pension that barely stretched far enough, I couldn't afford that kind of mistake. So I told her no. Calmly, gently. I said, "Sweetheart, I'm proud of how far you've come, but I can't take that kind of risk. I'm sorry." Her face went stone cold. No anger at first, just icy disbelief. Like I'd told her I wasn't her father anymore. "Wow," she said flatly. "You really are useless." My heart didn't even break. It just went quiet. She stood up so fast her chair screeched against the linoleum. "I asked you for one thing. One thing. After all the sacrifices I've made, and you can't even do this." I reminded her I've helped in the past, paid off her student loans, gave her the down payment for her first home, co-signed her car lease. But she waved it off like pocket change. "That was your job. You're my father. Or were you only willing to help when it made you feel like a hero?" I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just stood there, a wall between us. I told her again, firmly this time, that the answer was no. And that's when she said it. The sentence that cut through everything we'd built over 30 years. "You were never enough. Not as a dad. Not as a man. You're just a scared little nobody hiding in a shack." Then she walked out. No hug. No goodbye. Just slammed the door hard enough to rattle the kitchen windows. I didn't chase her. I didn't cry. I sat back down, looked at my cold coffee, and felt the kind of hollow that doesn't scream. It just hums quietly in the bones. The next morning, I realized she'd blocked me. Phone, email, social media. I was erased, like a typo she didn't want to proofread. I found out from my sister, Ellen, who called in a whisper like she was relaying war news. She's saying you cut her off emotionally, Ellen said. That you refused to help because you're jealous of her success. I almost laughed. Jealous? Of my own child? Of course not. But it didn't matter. The narrative was already out there, and I was the villain in it. The family grapevine turned sour quick. A cousin uninvited me from Thanksgiving. A nephew unfollowed me on Instagram. All because I didn't sign a piece of paper. I spent the next few weeks pretending to be okay. I went fishing. I repainted the back deck. I watched old westerns and made my own damn dinner. But inside, I was circling the drain. I kept wondering, was I wrong? Had I failed her somehow without realizing it? I replayed our old home videos, the ones where she was 8 years old and clung to my leg like it was her favorite toy. I remembered working triple shifts to get her braces, how I skipped my own birthday one year to afford her prom dress. But those things didn't seem to matter now. They'd faded in her memory like background noise. And what was left was this version of me she hated, a man who said no. The worst part wasn't the anger. It was the guilt. That quiet, creeping guilt that whispers maybe she's right. Maybe I hadn't done enough. Maybe my kind of love, slow, steady, unglamorous, wasn't what she needed. Maybe I should have risked it all, signed the paper, and hoped for the best. But every time I got close to that thought, I pictured my name on that loan, and her defaulting, and me losing the only thing I had left, my peace. I couldn't trade my stability for her ambition. Not again. Not this time. So I made a decision. If she wanted me gone, I'd give her that. No more calls. No more birthday texts. No more holding on to a version of her that no longer existed. She wasn't 8 years old anymore. And I wasn't the father she remembered, or maybe never truly valued. I went quiet. I didn't tell anyone. I just disappeared from her world. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have imagined, was that a few months later, she'd end up needing me more than ever. Not for money, not for real estate, but for something far more public and far more painful. And this time, I'd have to decide, would I show up to save her, or finally let her face the consequences of cutting me out? The day I decided to disappear wasn't dramatic. There was no final message, no long-winded speech, no warning. I just stopped. I woke up, made my usual cup of coffee, half calf, 1 sugar, a splash of cream, and stared out the window while the neighborhood started its morning shuffle. Somewhere between the second sip and the mail truck's arrival, I felt this strange quiet inside me. Not the peace kind of quiet, but the exhausted kind. The quiet you get after a storm when all that's left is debris. That was the day I stopped being her father. Not biologically, of course. That title is permanent. But emotionally, spiritually, I walked off the job that morning and didn't clock back in. I didn't tell anyone at first. There was no announcement, no dramatic farewell from the role of dad. I just deleted her number. I removed her contact photo, archived our last text thread, and tossed her childhood photos into a shoebox I sealed shut with duct tape. I knew if I looked at her as a little girl, the missing tooth, the skinned knees, the pigtails, I'd fold. I'd break. And I couldn't afford to break again. Not after what she said. Not after being called useless by the person I sacrificed the most for. So I didn't just step back. I vanished. I declined invitations to family barbecues, stopped showing up at Sunday church, and even switched grocery stores to avoid running into mutual acquaintances. If she wanted me gone, I'd give her the full vanishing act. But disappearing didn't mean I was free. It just meant the pain had a quieter place to fester. I'd find myself standing in the middle of the living room at midnight, holding that old Father's Day card she made in 2nd grade, the one with crooked crayon hearts and a stick figure version of me that said, "To the best dad in the universe." I'd stare at it like it belonged to someone else, like maybe I'd hallucinated all those years of bedtime stories and scrape-knee bandages. How do you reconcile a daughter who once begged to sleep in your bed during thunderstorms with a woman who now refuses to acknowledge your existence unless she needs a signature? It was Ellen who finally noticed. She showed up with a casserole, her way of forcing entry into other people's business, and plopped it onto my counter like she owned the place. "What's going on with you?" she asked, narrowing her eyes like she already knew the answer but wanted to hear me say it out loud. I tried brushing it off. Told her I was just tired, needed space. She didn't buy it. Ellen never buys anything that isn't marked down and bleeding truth. Eventually, I gave her the sanitized version. Marissa and I had a disagreement, and she's cut me off. I didn't tell her what Marissa called me. I didn't tell her about the mortgage request. I just said it wasn't working anymore. Ellen sat there for a while, not touching her tea, watching me like I was some broken appliance she wasn't quite sure how to fix. "You did everything for that girl," she finally said. "Don't let her rewrite the story just because she's mad." And that's when it hit me. Rewrite the story. That's exactly what Marissa was doing. She was out there spinning a version of events where I was the absentee father, the stingy man who withheld support out of spite. And the worst part? Some people believed it. Not because it was true, but because she was louder, younger, more convincing. I was just an old man with creaky knees and a thinning hairline. She had Instagram followers and a Pinterest perfect life. Who would they believe? Still, I stayed silent. I didn't defend myself. I didn't post cryptic Facebook statuses or send angry group texts. I let her version run wild because arguing would only make me look bitter. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own peace. I started volunteering at the local hardware store's youth program, teaching kids how to change tires, fix leaky sinks, use a damn screwdriver without stripping the head. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt good. Honest. Like I still had something to give. One boy, Marcus, asked me if I had kids. I paused for a beat too long before replying. "Used to." He nodded like he understood something deeper than I'd said out loud. But even in peace, there were echoes. I'd see a blonde woman at the gas station and think it was her. I'd hear a voicemail beep and half expect it to be Marissa, saying she'd made a mistake, that she was sorry. The call never came. What did come, though, was a letter. Not from her, about her. Certified mail, legal letterhead, cold and clinical. I opened it with trembling hands, thinking maybe she'd sued me for emotional damages or some other nonsense. But no, it was a subpoena. My name was listed as a potential character witness in an upcoming civil lawsuit involving my daughter. I sat down, reread it 4 times. Apparently, Marissa was being sued by a former business partner. Something about breach of contract, defamation, unethical practices. I couldn't make sense of the jargon, but one sentence leapt out at me. Character testimony from a reliable parental figure is recommended. Reliable parental figure. That was me. She'd listed me. After blocking me. After calling me useless. After erasing me from her life, she'd decided I was good enough to save her reputation. I stared at the envelope like it had bitten me. She hadn't reached out. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't even asked. Just listed me like an asset in her defense, another tool to be wielded in court. And something in me snapped, not with rage, but with resolve. I wasn't going to be used again. Not this time. If she wanted me gone, she'd have to live with that, publicly, legally, painfully. Still, I knew I had to make a decision. To show up or not. To testify or not. To protect the woman she used to be or confront the one she'd become. And the hardest part? I wasn't sure what I'd do until the day of the trial. But one thing was certain, whatever I chose, it wouldn't be for her. It would be for me. I was in line at the post office, holding a bundle of mail I meant to return to sender. Junk, mostly, and a stray letter still addressed to my ex-wife, though she hadn't lived with me in over a decade, when I heard her name. Not from a neighbor, not in a whispered phone call, but from the small TV bolted into the corner of the waiting room. It was the local news, mid-segment, and there she was, Marissa Taylor, my daughter, being escorted into a courthouse, her face partially hidden behind oversized sunglasses and a blazer that looked like it cost more than my truck. The cheering below her image read, "Local entrepreneur faces defamation lawsuit in business dispute." My stomach turned cold. I didn't even hear what the anchor said next. I was too busy watching the way she walked, tight-lipped, stiff, like a woman bracing for impact. I took the mail, tossed it in the bin outside, and drove home in a daze. The silence in the truck felt heavier than usual. My thoughts ping-ponged between disbelief and a sick kind of validation. So it wasn't just me. She wasn't just cruel to her father. She was out there burning bridges in broad daylight, dragging her name, and mine, through the legal system. I wanted to feel nothing. I told myself I'd moved on, that I was past it. But watching her on that screen reopened something. Not love, not regret, something closer to duty. A deep, stubborn thread inside me that still whispered, "You're her father, whether she likes it or not." The full details came out slowly, mostly through court bulletins and whispered updates from Ellen, who couldn't resist snooping once she realized I'd been listed as a potential witness. Marissa had apparently partnered with a former colleague to launch a marketing agency, a flashy, high-end boutique that promised next-level brand transformation. The partnership soured, as these things do, and now the other party was accusing her of slander, manipulation, and stealing proprietary strategies. Ugly stuff. Reputation-ruining stuff. The kind of lawsuit that didn't just end with a settlement. It ended with burned careers. And right there in the court documents, under the list of character witnesses, was my name, Raymond Taylor, father of the defendant. I didn't even know how they got my information. Probably from her lawyer. She must have told them I'd vouch for her. Paint a picture of a principled woman, an honest daughter raised with strong values. Maybe they expected me to sit on the stand and talk about her honor, her work ethic, how she always helped stray animals and volunteered at the soup kitchen. But the truth was, I didn't recognize the woman in that blazer. I hadn't for a long time. The little girl who once cried because a squirrel got hit by a car was gone. The woman in her place was sharp, transactional, and hollow in ways I didn't know how to fix. The letter that followed a week later was formal, cold, even. It came from her attorney's office. I was strongly encouraged to participate in her defense, given our close familial connection and the potential weight my testimony could carry in establishing her credibility. There was no personal note, no "Hi Dad, hope you're well." Just pages of legalese and a highlighted paragraph about courtroom appearance requirements. I held that letter for a long time, not reading it, just staring at it like it might rewrite itself into something softer. But it didn't. It stayed cold. I didn't respond. I didn't call her lawyer. I didn't reach out to Marissa. I just waited. Waited to see if she would break the silence. If she'd finally pick up the phone herself. But no call came. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. That told me everything I needed to know. She didn't want me. She wanted what I represented. Stability. Morality. The illusion of a supportive father. Someone who could paint her in a better light. I wasn't a person to her. I was a prop. The week of the trial, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night, eyes on the ceiling, replaying the last few years like a slideshow. The time I drove 6 hours to fix her dishwasher and slept on her couch. The time I mailed her money when her heating bill skyrocketed. The quiet thank yous. The increasing distance. And finally, that brutal day in my kitchen, where she called me a scared little nobody hiding in a shack. That voice still echoed in my head. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just numb. But the idea of sitting in that courtroom and pretending like nothing had happened, like we were still father and daughter in some Norman Rockwell painting, that was unbearable. I couldn't lie for her. Not in front of a judge. Not under oath. And certainly not to myself. Still, I knew I had to go. Not for her. But because if I didn't show up, someone else might spin my silence as cowardice. And I needed to look her in the eye. One last time. When the day came, I wore my best suit. Navy blue, a little snug around the waist, but clean and pressed. I shaved, combed my hair, and left the house in silence. The courthouse was packed. News vans outside, reporters murmuring into microphones. I ignored them, walked past like I didn't even see them. Inside, it smelled like paper and anxiety. Her attorney greeted me with a firm handshake, his voice too friendly. "Thanks for being here, Mr. Taylor. Your testimony could be pivotal." I just nodded. I wasn't here to make friends. When they called me to the stand, my heart beat steady but hard. Marissa looked up as I approached, her eyes widening just slightly. Surprise, maybe even hope. I didn't return her gaze. I faced the judge, raised my hand, swore to tell the truth. And then the lawyer began. "Mr. Taylor, how would you describe your daughter's character?" There was a long pause. I turned toward Marissa, looked her square in the face, and said clearly, calmly, "I don't recognize this woman." A silence fell across the courtroom. Thick, awkward, electric. The lawyer stammered. The judge tilted her head slightly. Marissa's lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came. I could feel the weight of the room shift. I stood up. "That's all I have to say." And then I walked out, past the stunned faces, past the reporters, past the life I used to know. Outside, I heard her shout after me. "You're wicked. You're evil." Her voice cracked, but I didn't stop walking. I didn't even flinch. I just kept moving forward, toward the parking lot, toward my truck, toward whatever came next. I had shown up. I had looked her in the eyes. And I had told the truth. I hadn't intended to return. After I gave my testimony and left the courtroom, I thought that was it. Curtain closed, story done. But I sat in my truck for nearly an hour after I walked out, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I kept staring at the courthouse doors like they were going to swing open and reveal a different ending. Maybe she'd run out crying. Maybe she'd chase me down with an apology or, at the very least, an explanation. But all that came through those heavy doors were more lawyers, more reporters, more people who didn't know a damn thing about what had really happened between us. So I drove home, the silence inside my cab humming louder than the engine. The next day, the fallout began. Not from her, but from everyone else. My sister Ellen called first, her voice tight and urgent. "Ray, what the hell did you say in there?" she asked, not even waiting for a hello. I told her the truth, plain and simple. I told them I didn't recognize her anymore. There was a pause, a long one, where I could practically hear her chewing on the words. "People are talking," she finally said. "She's saying you humiliated her in front of the entire courtroom. Said you betrayed her." I let out a low breath. "Funny," I said. "I thought she did that when she called me useless." Ellen didn't argue. She just sighed and whispered, "This family's never going to be the same." I didn't care about the gossip. Not really. What got to me was the feeling that something had been set in motion, something I couldn't walk back from. I hadn't just drawn a boundary. I'd built a damn wall. And the worst part? I didn't feel regret. Not even a flicker. That scared me more than anything. That I could sit there, stone-faced, while my only daughter's reputation unraveled, and feel nothing but the cold comfort of finally being honest. I wondered if that made me cruel. Or if maybe, just maybe, it made me free. The week that followed was a parade of silence punctuated by the occasional text from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were subtle. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." While others went straight for the throat. One cousin messaged, "Can't believe you'd turn your back on your own blood like that. Disgusting." I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I knew they only had one side of the story, and even if I told mine, they'd still twist it to fit whatever narrative suited them. The truth didn't matter. Not to people who preferred drama over depth. I thought I was done. Truly. I'd said my piece. I'd walked away. But then the court called again. They wanted me to return for cross-examination. Apparently, her legal team had pushed to challenge my statement, to poke holes in my credibility. I could have refused. I could have ignored it. But something inside me, some quiet, stubborn thing, said no. Show up. See this through. So I dusted off the same suit, shaved the same stubble, and went back to the same courthouse with a heart that felt harder than it did the week before. The second time around was colder, less chaotic. The surprise was gone. Now it was calculation. Her attorney, a polished man with perfect hair and shark-like eyes, tried to bait me. "Mr. Taylor, wouldn't you say you're harboring resentment toward your daughter?" I stared at him, then at Marissa, who was seated stiffly at the defense table, eyes focused on a spot just over my shoulder. "I'd say I'm harboring clarity," I replied. Took me a while to find it. The lawyer smirked, but I could tell he didn't like that answer. He kept pressing. "So you don't believe she's the same person you raised?" I leaned forward slightly, voice steady. "No, that girl's gone. And I've made peace with that." The judge watched me closely. I wasn't sure if she pitied me or respected me, but either way, she didn't interrupt. I continued, without being asked. "She's not the only one who gets to decide what family looks like. We talk so much about loyalty, about blood, but loyalty without respect? That's slavery. And I won't be shackled to someone who treats me like I'm disposable." The courtroom was silent. Marissa's face turned crimson. She looked like she might burst. But still, she said nothing. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I didn't head straight for the exit this time. I lingered, just for a second, to look at her. I wanted to see if there was any flicker, remorse, regret, even rage. Something human. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept her gaze glued to her lap, hands folded tight, like she was praying or holding something in. Maybe both. And just as I turned to leave, she finally spoke. Not to me, not to the judge, but to her lawyer, barely above a whisper. He's not who I thought he was. The words stung, but not because they were cruel. They stung because they were familiar. I'd said the exact same thing to myself for years about her. She's not who I thought she was. And now, standing on opposite sides of a courtroom, we were both right. We didn't know each other anymore. Maybe we never really had. Outside, the air felt sharper, like fall had arrived early, slicing through the last breath of summer. I walked to my truck slowly, each step heavier than the last. A few reporters hovered near the sidewalk, but they didn't approach me. I think they knew better now. I was no longer part of the narrative they wanted to tell. I was just the old man who said the unspeakable. I don't recognize my own daughter. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine, just staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked older than I remembered, more tired, but there was something else there too, something I hadn't seen in years. A flicker of peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from being vindicated, but from finally telling the truth. Not the kind of truth wrapped in politeness or sugar-coated for family's sake. The real kind. The raw kind. The kind that costs you something, but also sets you free. And that's when I knew I hadn't come to court to save or destroy her. I'd come to save myself. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into full-blown condemnation. Within 48 hours of my courtroom testimony, my name was being dragged across every family group chat and Sunday potluck in 3 counties. I wasn't just a father who refused to co-sign a loan anymore. I had officially been rebranded as Raymond the Betrayer. One cousin called me a narcissist in a Facebook post vague enough to deny, but sharp enough to land. A former co-worker from my union days left me a voicemail saying he was disappointed to hear what I'd become. Ellen tried to shield me from it, but you can't protect a man from a fire that's already burning in his own house. Every judgment felt like a match, and the whole damn place was catching. Still, I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself publicly, not because I was guilty, but because I finally understood that some people weren't interested in hearing the truth. They were addicted to the performance of outrage. I could have shown them every receipt, every tuition check, every birthday gift and emergency Venmo transfer, and it still wouldn't have been enough. They didn't want facts. They wanted villains. And I had given them one, neatly dressed and courtroom ready. But I'll tell you something no one else admits. There's a certain peace in being misjudged. It's like being left out in the cold, but finally able to breathe because no one's asking you to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. The only message that made me pause came late one night. A voicemail. I recognized the number before I played it, and my first instinct was to delete it before it even finished ringing. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the last thread of pain that still pulsed when I saw her name. Her voice was quiet, subdued in a way I hadn't heard in years. "You embarrassed me," she said. "You humiliated me in front of people who matter. But what hurts more is realizing I never really knew you. I thought you'd always be there, no matter what. I guess I was wrong." Then came the click of the disconnect. No apology, no request, just the sound of a woman finally realizing her father wasn't an unlimited resource. I didn't call back. I didn't even save the message. But I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, unplayed again, like a wound you stop touching but can't quite bandage. It stayed in my phone like a splinter in the digital age, small, sharp, and invisible unless I scrolled past it. And every so often, I did scroll past it. Not to replay it, just to remind myself of the silence that followed. She hadn't tried again. Not a call, not a card, not a text that said, "Hey Dad, I know we're both hurting." Nothing. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted surrender. And I had none left to give. The part that twisted the knife wasn't the voicemail. It was what happened at the grocery store the following week. I was walking down the bread aisle, minding my own business, when I ran into Carol Harris, an old neighbor from when Marissa was still in middle school. She looked me up and down like I was something she found on the bottom of her shoe. "Heard what you said in court," she muttered, not even pretending to be subtle. "Some father you turned out to be." I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped myself. What could I say that wouldn't turn into more gossip for her to pass along at book club? So I just nodded and pushed my cart past her, feeling the weight of every invisible bruise. After that, I started doing my shopping in the next town over. 10 extra miles for peace of mind seemed like a fair trade. I started going to a different barber, changed my church schedule, and even started taking my walks in the evening when fewer people were out. It wasn't shame that kept me hidden. It was the exhaustion of explaining myself to people who'd already decided who I was. And the truth was, I didn't know them a damn thing. Not my story, not my sorrow, not even my presence. Ellen came by one Saturday with a plastic tub full of old family photos. She said she was cleaning out her attic, but I think she just wanted to check on me without making it obvious. We sat on my back porch, flipping through pictures of birthdays and barbecues, and for a moment, the weight of the last few months lifted. She pointed to a picture of Marissa at her high school graduation, cap tilted, eyes gleaming, me standing beside her with one arm around her shoulder. "She loved you once," Ellen said softly. "Maybe she still does, somewhere under all that anger." I didn't respond. I just looked at that picture like it belonged to a different lifetime. And maybe it did. I asked Ellen something I hadn't said out loud until that moment. "Do you think I gave up on her too soon?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. "No," she said. "I think you held on too long. And now you're just learning how to let go." That hit me harder than anything else had. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. I'd spent so many years holding on. To memories, to expectations, to the hope that one day she'd become the daughter I remembered. But people change, and sometimes they don't come back. Later that night, I took that photo from the porch and placed it face down in the drawer of my nightstand. I wasn't ready to throw it away, but I also couldn't look at it anymore. It didn't represent joy. It represented loss. Not the kind of loss you mourn in public, but the kind you carry in your chest like a cracked rib, quiet, persistent, and always flaring up when you least expect it. And yet, even in all that grief, I felt something else. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But strength. The kind that comes from choosing your own well-being over someone else's comfort. I wasn't proud of what had happened, but I wasn't ashamed either. I had drawn a line. I had refused to be manipulated. And in doing so, I had reclaimed something I hadn't realized I'd lost, my self-respect. The first morning I woke up and didn't think about her felt almost wrong. It was a Tuesday again, same quiet hour, same filtered light coming through the kitchen blinds. But something had shifted. The ache that used to hum under my skin was gone. Not replaced with joy, not even relief. Just a stillness, like a pond after a long storm. I stood at the sink rinsing my coffee mug and realized I'd slept through the night without dreaming of courtrooms or old birthday parties. I didn't check my phone for missed calls. I didn't replay that voicemail in my head. The silence had finally stopped sounding like punishment. It had become peace. I'd always thought peace would feel triumphant, like crossing a finish line or conquering something. But in reality, it was much smaller than that. Quieter. It came in the form of routines I didn't have to justify, of meals I cooked without setting an extra place, of days that stretched out without emotional landmines waiting to be stepped on. It came in the form of learning how to enjoy my own company again, not because I had no one else, but because I no longer had to carry someone else's anger like it was my own. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't cheer. It just let me breathe. I spent more time at the hardware store, volunteering with the youth program. The kids started calling me Mr. T, like it was some inside joke, and every time one of them learned how to patch a tire or hang drywall, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the kind that demanded sacrifice or came laced with guilt, but the simple kind, the kind that builds slowly and quietly until it feels like home. One afternoon, Marcus, the same boy who once asked if I had kids, came up to me after class, holding a crooked birdhouse and grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You should have been a dad," he said without irony. I looked at him and smiled. I told him. In a way. That night, I went home and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the photo drawer. The one with all the old pictures. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what was in there. Memories that didn't match the woman she became. I'd spent too long measuring who she was against who she used to be. And maybe that was part of the problem. I kept expecting the child to come back, not realizing that sometimes people grow into strangers. And that's what she was now, a stranger. A stranger with my last name. A stranger who once called me Daddy with the kind of devotion that made me believe I'd done something right. I got a final message from her a few weeks later. Not a voicemail this time, just a single sentence sent through email. No subject line. Just, "I hope you can sleep at night." I stared at it for a long time, my hands hovering over the keyboard. There was so much I could have said. I could have listed every sacrifice. I could have reminded her of every time I showed up, every late-night phone call I answered, every debt I paid. But none of it would matter. She didn't want the truth. She wanted me to feel guilty. She wanted me to carry her shame like it was my own. But I wouldn't do it. Not anymore. So I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. I didn't rage. I didn't weep. I just let it sit there like an unanswered doorbell. Maybe she'd check again later, hoping for a response. Maybe she wouldn't. But I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that silence was the only answer she was ever going to get. Because silence, for once, was mine. And I wasn't giving it back. One Sunday afternoon, I was raking leaves when Ellen pulled into the driveway with a bag of groceries and her usual concerned expression. "You look lighter," she said, handing me a loaf of bread and a rotisserie chicken. "Have you finally forgiven her?" I shook my head. "No," I said, placing the bag on the counter. "I've just stopped needing anything from her." Ellen didn't push. She just nodded like someone who understood that peace wasn't about mending what was broken. It was about learning to stop bleeding for someone who won't even admit they cut you. The neighborhood started to shift with the season. Leaves fell, kids rode bikes without training wheels, couples walked hand in hand like nothing in the world could fall apart. And me? I kept going. Not because I'd moved on completely. Not because I'd stopped missing the idea of her. But because I finally accepted that closure doesn't come from a perfect conversation or a well-timed apology. Sometimes, closure is just a door you lock yourself, knowing damn well the person on the other side has already walked away. It's a strange kind of freedom, realizing that love doesn't have to be unconditional to be real. That sometimes, the most honest act of love is walking away when you're being used. That you can grieve someone who's still alive. And you can protect yourself from the people who call you family, but treat you like an afterthought. I still love her. I probably always will. But that love no longer gets to make decisions for me. That love is quiet now, tucked away like an old photo in a drawer I don't need to open anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing really looks like. Not a reunion, not forgiveness, but finally learning the difference between holding on and being held hostage. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved, especially a family member, because staying meant losing yourself, I want to hear your story. When did you know it was time to let go? What finally gave you peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story hit close to home, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about family, boundaries, and the emotional cost of doing what's right. Your voice matters here. Let's talk about it. See you soon in the next story.